morning and welcome. We're going to call to order the special meeting for the Akron Public Schools Board of Education for this June 19th, 2020, otherwise known as Juneteenth. Roll call, please.
Dr. Akbar.
Here.
Mr. Alexander.
Present.
Ms. Autry.
Present.
Mr. Bravo.
Here.
Dr. Hall.
Aye.
Mrs. Mansfield.
Here.
Mrs. McKittrick. Thank you.
And as I stated earlier, Ms. McKittrick had a prior commitment, so she is excused from this meeting. So thank you all and welcome. If we could all mute, then we will join in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you so much. And thank you all again for joining us for this special meeting. I know it's a Friday. I know we have a lot to do in our respective jobs, and we'll try to be mindful of the time as we head through this meeting. But this is the second in a series of special meetings that we're having with the Akron Public School Board to discuss our current state and possibility for the future need for a levy on the ballot. And so we want to start or continue that conversation today. And based on a meeting that Vice President Akbar and I had with the administration, we have adjusted our agenda so that our topics are in a little bit different order than what we had previously planned. And that's okay. I think this is better. But we are going to turn it over to our administration to sort of kick off the discussion today and continue with our discussion on whether there's a need for a future levy request on the ballot. Mr. Superintendent? You're muted, Mr. Superintendent.
There we go. It's hard when you're splitting the screen on a Chromebook. So the one thing I wanted to open the discussion with today is basically more of the context around the need, and not necessarily the financial need, but the more global issue of our educational system and what we deliver and the things that, you know, as a collective, we feel are important. We know that we've started down the road of like our college and career academy program. We have been working in the past year before the COVID-19 emergency on looking at expanding that to middle school. We've learned some things from COVID-19, you know, just in terms of online learning, and there seems to be a desire with a segment of our population to continue that. How can we improve it? And also some of the social emotional needs of our community that have come to light, you know, during this emergency. Many of the mental health issues in serving our students, and also there's been a fairly long-standing conversation in our community around early learning. And so I wanted to start that conversation and get some of your comments and input on that as a much more, you know, general context of what we do, and then how that can fit into you know, a possible levy conversation, particularly in our future meetings where we'll dive more into, you know, some of the financial need to support the desire of the board on how we want to move forward. And really, you know, our most important goal today is really to discuss, listen, and absorb, and build upon what we can learn from each other. We're aware of our finances and some of the challenges that we face, I think, from CFO Pendleton, about the potential for additional funding cuts from the state. But I think we need to really set the stage for, moving forward, what we want to do, from the academic, socially. Our equity work, I think, is going to, take on prime importance, and we're going to have to, create responses to those. And so I just wanted to open it up with that and then start that discussion. Mr. President.
Great, thank you. Would anyone like to start with any comments? Mr. Alexander.
Yeah, I was just listening to what the Superintendent James was saying, Dr. James, and I think we do need to, if we talk about putting a levy on it, we need to talk about the college and career academies and how we sustain those and the benefits that the kids gain from being in the college and career academy. I also think that when you're talking, you gotta make sure you talk about equity, because equity means making sure that all the kids get what they need so they can be successful. If you don't give them what they need so they can be successful, then they won't gain, and our district will lose. And then we also we talked about this, and I know we were going to do this a little while ago. We kind of got stagnant a little bit, but early childhood education is very important for our kids. I mean, if we want our kids to be successful, we need to make sure this early childhood education is built into so that those kids who need that can really get it in order to move our system forward. Because if not, they're going to come in behind, and it means the teacher's going to be behind the gun to try to bring them up to a higher level or the level they need to be at, and so it's going to be tougher. So they're kind of going to always be a little behind to a certain extent. So we need to make sure that we emphasize all those things and how important those things are to a school district, but not just to the school district, but to the city as a whole. Because if the school district is not well, the city is not going to be well, which means businesses and everything else, everyone else will want to leave. And we don't want to be like our friends, our neighbors down in Youngstown with all the things that has gone on down there and how things they've lost. So I think that's important. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Sorry, I was having trouble unmuting. Would anyone else like to jump in at that point? Ms. Autry.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Dr. James. I was happy to hear you say that it's just not about our financial needs. It is much more than that. So I appreciate you mentioning that. All of those items that you touched upon, I think, are a great priority that we should be promoting, because there's not too many organizations that can allow their students to gain credentials along with their high school diploma. That's very valuable. So that's definitely a priority. As far as the at-home learning, I'm just happy that we were equipped to be able to transform so easily. And I just want us to remain flexible moving forward for those who want to continue in that method. We're evolving with education, and I just feel like we're in a unique position, not only to, ask for the support, because we've certainly proved our worth, but to also be collaborative in how we are looking at how education is delivered moving forward. So definitely those are priorities. But most importantly for me, you touched upon is the mental health. Just given everything that's going on, that definitely needs to be in the conversation. I like to see us making purposeful decisions on addressing those at an even greater level than what we're doing, just given just the climate globally, and definitely making it so, each school has their own personality and issues, and we're empowering them to be able, to address those things that they know are specific to their particular building. So, and just lastly, my last point, the equity piece. I think anything we do moving forward should be framed under the lens of equity. And we don't want to feel like we know all the issues. We need to be open to what the perceptions are of the community of what equity is and how they view it, and where they feel like, things may or may not have been equitable in their eyes, and how can we meet them? So thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Good points. Dr. Akbar and then Ms. Mansfield.
I think that when we talk about the need, this is a very critical conversation, and we've seen just in our community how essential our schools are to provide needs for our community and for those who actually need us the most. And so I think that that's going to be even more important as we continue in some uncertain environment moving forward, with not knowing how long we will be in COVID realities. And then just to what Dr. James said, and even Diana said, we have families where that offering virtual learning may be the best for them. And so how do we do that effectively? That's not going to come without a cost associated with it. But the other thing that you talked about, two things. Early childhood is very important to me. When we talk about equity, we cannot have a conversation around equity without talking about getting more people access to early learning. That is a crucial point. We know if students don't get basic learning skills and reading skills by the third grade, that will significantly put them back in later years, and even so much so at greater risk of dropping out. So we want to replicate those success practices that we know work. And so finding ways to extend early learning is something that I'm really passionate about and interested in as far as the need is concerned. Unfortunately, the state doesn't provide us funding for it in the ways we wish they did. That would make it a lot easier, but I think we can find some creative ways to partner with entities in the community that are doing that type of work to try to extend learning there. The other piece and last piece around racial equity is our hiring. If we're going to look at different ways to diversify our teaching force and our staffing, we have to also be open to having a conversation with our unions and other partners about creating incentives to also provide innovative hiring practices to encourage people to work in Akron Public Schools and stay in Akron Public Schools. So those are all things that are that's going to require some additional funding, and also rethinking how we fund those type of initiatives. So I think that's a part of the need as well.
Good, thank you. Ms. Mansfield?
Good morning, everybody. I love getting to go after my brilliant colleagues because they cover so much and it's easy to just say ditto. So there are a lot of things I would say ditto to. I think that the superintendent brought up such a good point with the social emotional learning and the mental health piece that's going to come out of this world that we're currently finding ourselves in. I know when I go to bed at night, there's a lot that's keeping me awake, and I have some coping skills that I've learned over the years. I can't imagine what it's like if you're 7 right now. I can't imagine what it's like if you're in crisis and your family doesn't have work and you're watching television and seeing people that look like you killed in front of your eyes. I can't imagine what it's like to be afraid of even getting sick. So I think we're going to have to really be ready. And I know our team has been working hard on creating the best environment when we come back. But I think that we don't have to look far for models because we've already been working on that. And that's what we have. One of the reasons we have the I Promise School is we could take what we've learned there and take it out to our other schools. And we know that some of those things come at an additional cost. And we know that if we're going to do it right, we have to meet those kiddos where they are. I keep thinking of the ones we saw in the documentary, right? Those are faces that are seared into my brain, and they're just representative of not just the students at the I Promise School, but the students all over Akron Public Schools who, didn't necessarily meet all of the criteria to get in and then didn't make it in the lottery. There are thousands of them that have those needs. So taking models that we already have, and the community loves it, right? They love the I Promise School. How do I get my kid into the I Promise School? Love that LeBron school. We get stopped all over the country, asked about it. So hopefully taking a lot of what we've learned there, whether it's the extended calendar, the extended day, working with our communities to figure out what that could look like, without costing a whole lot more money, but with seeing the vital importance of it, especially with the strive for social justice and just dealing with all we're dealing with. So I hope that we can really look at what those crucial needs are going to be, and maybe look to the models that we're finding great success with. That's where I'll leave it.
Mr. President, this is Dr. Hall. If I could just weigh in. First, I had an internet snag and kind of lost the first part of this conversation. I just want to make sure that I have the question right. So we're talking through sort of the global and community issues, kind of a list of items that we've heard as being community and needs. Is that where we're at?
Yes, I think that's close.
So I was able to hear most of the comments that were made. So don't want to be redundant and would echo Ms. Mansfield's commentary about. I think you've all covered most of the things I was going to say. I guess the one thing I would add would be I also don't want to lose sight on ensuring that we've got really thinking through how do we expand and sort of flesh out, if you will, our gifted and talented programs as well. So that'd be the other sort of bullet point that I think that we don't want to lose sight of here, especially as we look to, with Portage Path, for example, adding on the IB program there. I think there's a real opportunity here, to start to look at other parts of town besides the west side, as other spots to sort of roll out some of these gifted and talented. So that'd be kind of what I would add to what you all have already said.
Good, thank you. And I would want to echo Ms. Mansfield on expanding a lot of our best practices. From my vantage point, we have so many of those, including the I Promise School, and what a tragedy I think it is, even in the 21st century, that some of our kids receive services based on a lottery. That it's not available to all who need it necessarily, but we also understand that those additional wraparound resources and programs require additional funding. But we do need to expand on some of those best practices. We've seen the results early on already, some of the I Promise results, and they're promising. But if we could provide that to more of our kids and not just based on a lottery, would be fantastic. To Ms. Autry's point, I love the fact that I see in the restart committees that we have one dedicated to mental health. And I tried to jump in on that one for a few minutes this past week, but I just caught the tail end of it as they were wrapping up. But I love that we're thinking about that. And early childhood, of course, echoing all of your sentiments and certainly Dr. Akbar's, that's been a big push for me for many years. And some of you may know we technically still have an ad hoc committee on early childhood education, which unfortunately we started last year, and we had just started getting going, and I had just started attending the first my first meetings with our partners to start to figure out how do we populate that committee, how do we get some feedback. And then we got into this year, and then COVID hit, and things have been stalled. I would love to see any efforts moving forward that we have on building up early childhood education. And to Dr. Akbar's point, I mean, if you're going to talk about equity, I mean, you can't get any more granular on equity than providing early childhood education to every kid in this community. We need to talk about what that looks like and how it operates and what the expectations are, because I don't think the expectation would be that we'd be able to set up universal pre-K for every child in this community based on the levy conversations that we've had so far, but also, as Dr. Akbar mentioned, reaching out and working with our partners around the community to begin with a plan that starts expanding it at the very least, I think is crucial to this conversation. And then figuring out how we build it from there. But I think it's time for us to set some bold goals for this district for ourselves, and say we're going to do it, and then figure out how to do it. And we've done that before. It's the Akron way. We even did it most recently with COVID. We said we're going to turn this district around and go online and continue providing education to every kid, and we got it done. So I think we need to set some bold goals for ourselves, and I love what I'm hearing so far. So I'll stop there, Mr. Superintendent.
Thank you. So, my reflections on this is, in the past, many of our levy campaigns have strictly been about, when we look at, our revenue and expenses, and this is the differential and we need more money. I think this COVID issue and just the state, of our society today has exposed a lot of issues that, as a community, we need to handle. The equity piece is a big one, and that means some restructuring of our organization in order to implement the policies that the board is passing so that we can reach the goals of having, equity across the board, not just in hiring, but in purchasing and in offering opportunities for all of our students. I think, in terms of our educational programs, making sure, as Mrs. Autry referenced, the fact that our kids can get, various credentials, when they graduate. We also have opportunities, working with the chamber, with our local businesses. There's a lot of conversations in our community where we're already working on many of these issues, but I don't think everyone realizes how interconnected these are. So there have been some conversations about, trying to expand pre-K. There are some partners out there that we need to approach, or potential partners, and we need to have those conversations with. We have with our I Promise School, we know that United Way has family resource centers at Helen Arnold and at Robinson, and want to expand. And that's one way of helping, our families be made whole with some of the resources that we actually don't provide, but we can partner with people, but that still is a cost to us. And so, we have a restart plan for COVID, but actually, I would like that to go further, as you said, Mr. President, in terms of being bold, and not to, co-opt United Way's terminology, but we really need a restart plan for the district as a whole, not just in response to COVID, but in response to the situations that are going on, in our community currently and across the country, because we're in a new reality now. And, not just taking the financial picture as pluses and minuses, but really having a conversation with our community about the things that we need to do differently, things that we can't do anymore, because, there's only so much that we can do. Some things have to be modified. Some things that we're doing have to be changed and taken off the table to place new priorities and strategies on the table for us to go with moving forward. So some of the things that the guiding principles that can help us, move forward with this decision. And so as a staff, we just need to know some of the, data pieces and information. We'll have our ideas, but certainly want to hear from our board, because your input is really the most important about some of the data to help make that decision on, whether a levy gets put, a vote to put a levy on the ballot comes, and also reaching out to some of our partners that we need to help us with that.
And also,
in general.
Mr. Superintendent, if I could just throw out there as well, something else that we haven't talked about that we still need to talk about, and it's not necessarily directly tied to an operating levy, but it is tied to any potential levy request, is our capital plan for physical plants, the buildings that we still have left that need to be renovated or rebuilt or consolidated or whatever the case may be. We still have athletic facilities and things that we're hearing from the community about. And so that probably needs to be part of that, reset, restart plan with our bold goals on what we're going to do to accomplish the rest of that. There's only so much, so many rubber bands and duct tape and Band-Aids we can put on some of these buildings. Right. And we do see the board, authorizing requests to fix roofs and replace things. But anyway, just wanted to throw that out there. Our capital needs are also something that we probably need to talk about. And technology moving forward. I mean, to your point about the new reality and however long this lasts and what that means, new technology purchases, replacement costs, all of that are going to have to be part of that conversation. And how do we make sure that we're ready for the next event?
Well, yeah. Hey, if I could, President, to that last point about the capital and sort of what we're doing with our buildings, lot of question, at least in Kenmore Garfield cluster, about those exact types of items. And so I think as we sort of move this conversation forward, and I'm sure that there's probably, there may be other concerns in other clusters as well, but again, being that I'm assigned to Kenmore Garfield, that's where I'm sort of most in the weeds. And I can say there's a lot of angst and uncertainty, in their minds about what we're doing or what we're not going to do as it relates to those buildings, and be, reopening, closing, rehabbing. Just again, so I think as we sort of move this forward, as we want to engage people in the community, also have to be ready to sort of answer those questions as well as they arrive in some of these community venues and settings.
Yes, good points. Thank you. And we have a couple of comments in the chat. Anyone else like to jump in? Mr.
Yeah. Yes. So I just want to emphasize what Dr. James said. I think it was beautifully said, and I don't want us to minimize it. I think we need to elevate it. Is that we're basically at a place where we have to make a choice. Is do we go back to the way things were, or do we use this as a pivotal opportunity to actually launch us into the future? And I think that's our superintendent said it very well, that he wants us to launch into the future. And I think that's what we all want. And I think that shouldn't be understated. And I just want to really illuminate that statement that Dr. James said. And it's going to require us to do a lot of things differently. And whenever we have change, we have growing pains. And I like to think of change sometimes as growing pains, because when we were growing up, we had those slight little ooches and ouches, right? And but we are now, not me, but the rest of you are now taller because of it, right? I didn't get the height gene there, so I don't know what that's like. But most people, know what growing pains are. They know what it feels like, and it's not comfortable when you're going through it. But at the end, you're glad that you did. And so we're going to have some growing pains as we look deep at our operations and make some shifts. And the last thing I want to talk about and just illuminate again on what Dr. James said is like spring cleaning. You know, whenever you do your own spring cleaning in your own home, in your own house, you do look at, you know, you take stock of what you've all been able to accumulate over the years and what needs to go, so you can bring in new things in your life. And so to make your life better, to make your home better, to spruce your home up. And so I think this is the same process. We're going to have some tough conversations, and not everyone's going to come out of those conversations getting everything that they want. But at the end of the day, I think at least this conversation helps illuminates the fact that our main goal is focus on the needs of our community and needs of our students. And if we keep that central, then we can let go of some things that are like so essential to us personally, but may not help us get to launching in the future, as Dr. James said.
Good, thank you. Mr. Pendleton and then Dr. Hall.
Thank you. I did want to thank the board and the superintendent for framing the conversation today around educational needs. It is really difficult to communicate with your community. I've been through a number of levy attempts, and when it is structured purely around the finances, whether you're deficit spending, it really comes across disingenuous. The funding mechanism in Ohio is what it is. And I think districts that only communicate in times of need, those fall short. This board has responded to that. I know in my tenure, in the 5 years that I've been here, we've talked about this day for a very long time. Since 2012, it has been a focus of the board and administration to protect programming. And I think the programming part of that conversation has led us all the way through. So I do very much appreciate that. It makes finance a lot easier. My second comment is in regards to the capital needs. So we do understand in Ohio that there's two separate pots of money. There's general fund, what our typical operating levy goes toward, and then there's permanent improvement, what our capital needs. While there is a need, or at least a global high level need, and we're kind of ending our cycle of when we need operating funds, if we're not able to address our operating needs, we will have to address our capital and permanent improvement needs through our general fund. And the best way that I can explain is that that money is taken away from the classroom. When we repair a roof, when we do a building upgrade or a needed upgrade, or HVAC or a boiler, it takes away from the classroom. So again, just want to frame that and follow along with how you've set today's discussion up around protecting educational programming. That to Dr. Hall's point about, and I think Mrs. Mansfield's point about the two different clusters and buildings that haven't been addressed, if we don't proceed sometime in the future with operating funds, we will have to dip into our general fund to take care of our buildings, and that takes away from students. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Pendleton. Dr. Hall.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. So, I agree with the comments and sentiments conveyed and shared by Dr. James and Dr. Akbar. And I think Dr. Akbar was kind of reading my mind a bit, with his comments as well. In that, I think that we do have to take stock and take inventory of sort of the entire house, and then prioritize sort of what are the key. It might be what are the key 3 to 5 things, right? I think the beauty in what they did was its simplicity, right? I mean, they took, they didn't try to boil the ocean. They kind of took stock, took inventory, and said, okay, there's 1,000 things that we could be working on, or it's just to work on 1,000 things. We don't have the manpower to work on 1,000 things, and woman power as well, right? To work on 1,000 things. And so they worked, to really kind of think about, all right, well, if we are where are the biggest opportunities for our effort, as in, i.e., biggest bang for our buck. And so I think that's the conversation. And as we've talked about treat in place, I think that's probably as well to maybe have some of this conversation, as well as that. No one's suggesting this. I get that, but I just don't want us to fall into the trap of, trying to boil the ocean. What we need to do is kind of take stock, take inventory, I think, as Dr. Akbar kind of mentioned, and then say, hey, listen, like, what are the top 3 to 5 things we think we can do, what we've got. And then that becomes tied to the levy conversation, because again, the levy, you would hope, would allow us to expand upon that list of 3 to 5 things. Now, maybe it becomes 7 to 9 priorities as opposed to 3 to 5, right? So, I mean, so I agree that, as you guys have heard me say multiple times, now is the time for action, so an environment and an activated community, both locally, state, and federal. I think we're all activated now, and there's very real, we have to capitalize on and strike while the iron is hot. So those are my comments. And again, I'm just very grateful to you as we sort of move this forward.
Thank you, Dr. Akbar. Anyone else like to jump in? Or thank you, Dr. Hall. Dr. Akbar, it looks like you have something.
I was gonna say, wow, I haven't got taller. No, but
Wait, and you got better looking too.
Hey, that's debatable. But to stay on topic, Patrick, myself, Ellen, and Dr. McWilliams-Woods and Dr. James had a conversation last week about how do we move this forward when we talked about the next steps with the levy discussions, right? And so one of the things that we talked about is the district has already started a process of looking at, thinking of a new strategic plan and new goals, and bringing us into that process. And so that's something that we talked about, possibly having a retreat to go through that process sometime before the school year started. So your points, Dr. Hall, are right on target with what we've literally just discussed on Monday.
Thank you. And I'll just echo that, Dr. Akbar, I think you were reading my mind this time, because I was going to mention something about that as well, because we're having a really good discussion here about what we're hearing around the community, what each of us kind of brings to the table in terms of our own desires as to where we'd like to see the district go. I'd love to be able to have a follow-up conversation about this and boil those down to some of our own bold goals as to where we'd like to see this district go. And stealing from Dr. James again, because I like that also, launching us into the future. And maybe there's something to be built around that between the conversations we're having now and the ones that we had where we talked about having a retreat. So I think that'd be great. Who else has something they'd like to contribute before I give it back to Dr. James? Okay.
So, Mr. President, I'd like to give, I like to use my example of the type of work that we need to engage in. And I would highly suggest that, the board work on getting a retreat sooner rather than later, because I even have an annual retreat with my staff. And a lot of times the work that comes out of the board retreats informs what I do with my staff. But this isn't like we've served over 60,000 or 575,000, close to, let's just say close to 600,000 meals. I'll go the other way. All right. During the pandemic. And, I know Laura Kepler, who runs Shell Nutrition, will probably kill me when I say this, but it's complicated, but it's technical work. We know how to do that. Okay. And we know how to do it well. So a change, in the past, when we moved, when school is closed and we moved to summer feeding, the city has basically done that. Well, this year we're working with the city so that, we're doing a large portion of it within Akron. I think the city's doing the other areas that are outside of Akron because it's been a countywide program. That's technical work. That's not adaptive work. We need to focus on, I like what Dr. Hall said, because even as an administration, we're limited to what we can handle. If we try to boil the ocean, we're going to fail. But if we can focus on 3 to 5 critical community issues that are going to help propel us to a higher level of operating, both efficiency, in terms of meeting our goals, and that's what we need to do, and that's adaptive work, which is where we're going to have to do things differently. We're going to have to respond differently. And it doesn't mean that other goals outside of those 3 to 5 can't get accomplished. I think the good thing with us is that we have a lot of partners that can help ease the burden. We have a great partnership with United Way that really is expanding, as I said before, some of the family resource pieces that are needed in our community. We have, of course, a large business community that's helping us with college and career academies and other areas. And the chamber, which has done a lot, with some of the equity work just in terms of economic health and prosperity and employment, which I think is important, for our community. And let's not forget, our mayor's office and city hall, because, the conversation has to be, not to use the state's pun around COVID, but we are in this together just in terms of our community. And so, my desire is to really have our staff work and help, together with the board, and how we can actually get to this, more bold vision for the district in light of everything, that we're faced. It's just, it's even affected me, looking at some of our recent events with our students, and there's a lot. I mean, back to Mrs. Autry's point about, mental health services. I know there are some conversations about, police and schools and things like. There's a lot of conversations we need to have. That's why I would highly recommend, a board retreat sooner than later. So with Dr. McWilliams-Woods, Mr. Pendleton, and myself, we can really get, more information from you on how, for long term, how you want to proceed with that. And then that helps inform our discussions, about a levy.
And it just so happens too that Dr. Akbar and I will be meeting with Dr. James, Dr. Ellen McWilliams-Woods, and Mr. Pendleton Monday morning for our meeting. And I know one of you will be joining us. Check your calendars if you haven't. And we'll make this a topic of discussion so that we can start to look at when we would like to get that scheduled. And I think this is probably a good kickoff. And I love the fact personally that our board is looking at ways that we can not just have a conversation about a levy, which we need to continue the operations we have now, but how do we also turn that into a conversation, as already been stated, about launching us into the future and setting some bold goals for our district ourselves that we own and are responsible for. Because as you guys know, I mean, we've managed the finances as well as we can. We've had that conversation. We've pushed off a levy as far as we can. We've had that conversation. There is a need, but we can do more. And I think we've made that abundantly clear today, whether that's with hiring practices, whether that's with capital needs, whether that's with curricular needs. There's a lot more that we can do. So I'm excited about this. What else do we have, Mr. Superintendent, that you'd like us to discuss before we?
I think that was really it. And we want to make sure that we're not taking more time that's necessary, but really to hit the ground running on these. I've taken some notes. I know Mr. Pendleton has as well as Dr. McWilliams-Woods, but that was really how I wanted to frame at least this first conversation. I think we got in my mind what some of those 3 to 5, issues are. I think we need to work on them as an administrative team, in terms of refining some of the things that we see with those. And then maybe at our next meeting, we can do a quick review on distilling that and then move into some of our next topics as well.
Okay. And does anybody else have anything for today's conversation? We're at about 12:16, so I want to be respectful of everyone's time. I know many of us are on lunch. Anything else? All right, well, the next step too then will be, of course, our meeting Monday morning. So we'll carry this out a little bit further and start talking about some possibilities Monday morning. And then we have our regular board meeting Monday night. So if there's nothing else, going once, going twice, going 3 times, all right, then we'll take a motion to adjourn and we'll pick this conversation back up on Monday.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you so much for joining us for this special meeting.
Everyone
Thanks,
have a good day,
everyone.
good weekend.
All right.
Thank
you.
you too.
Be safe.
Take care. All right,
Have
bye-bye.
a great weekend.